Hello, everybody. This is Gary Simon, and I'm the Chief Executive of FSN and leader of the Modern Finance Forum on LinkedIn. I'd like to warmly welcome all FSN's members and guests from around the world to what promises to be a fascinating webinar. Today, I'm delighted to be interviewing Henry Umney, the strategist and spreadsheet visionary behind ClusterSeven, with more than a decade of experience in the specialist field of managing spreadsheets. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank ClusterSeven, the sponsor of today's webinar, which is one of the world's leading providers of software to manage end-user computing such as spreadsheets. Now, we all know that spreadsheets perform a vital role in most organizations and remain the finance professional's tool of choice. Yet at the same time, Excel usage has proliferated to mountainous levels, fueled by a spreadsheet spiral, something that was first identified in FSN's groundbreaking research into financial reporting, which pinpoints the exact causes of spreadsheet growth. Few businesses know the true extent of their spreadsheet universe and, for example, which spreadsheets are business critical or high risk. But this doesn't mean that nothing can be done about the problem. And that's the point of this interview. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to discuss how to reduce the impact of the spreadsheet spiral, how to reduce spreadsheet clutter, and Henry is going to give us some tips on how to manage what's left, including, of course, the mission critical spreadsheets. So we have a very packed agenda, but before launching into the webinar, I'd just like to cover a little bit of housekeeping. If you want to ask any questions, then please type your question into the box in the display panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll try and get to it during the webinar, or if there isn't time, we'll reach out to you afterwards. So let's get underway. Henry, are you there?
Hello, Gary. Delighted to be here. Looking forward to the discussion on the webinar.
Fantastic. Good to see you in inverted commas here, Henry. So let's start. Henry, spreadsheets have been with us since the early 80s, and there is no sign yet of the finance profession giving up on its favorite tool. Now, you spend all of your professional time immersed in the world of spreadsheets. So tell us why you think spreadsheets are so attractive.
Well, Gary, I think the primary benefit or attraction of Excel is its flexibility. We know Excel can be used for anything from creating a shopping list through to running the finances of your company. So that flexibility, I think, is key. Its availability. So every user has Excel on its desktop. Over the last 10 to 15 years, that desktop has become ever increasingly powerful. Also, Microsoft has very helpfully in developing Excel, given us a lot more power within Excel itself. Just to name one, Excel 2007 allowed us to have 1 million rows in each of our worksheets. So the flexibility is combined with an immense sort of desktop computing power at the fingertips of the users. And really, if you combine those two things, what you really have is you're allowing an end user, a finance professional, to be very self-sufficient to meet requirements that come. So rather than turning to the first port of call to their IT function, when new requirements are placed at the door of the finance professional by the business, they're able to be self-sufficient and meet that requirement quite quickly.
Yeah, and I guess I would add, it's very international. I mean, our audience here today is international. Everybody uses spreadsheets. You don't need to explain what it is. So when does a spreadsheet, Henry, cross the line between being a useful management tool and, frankly, becoming a hindrance?
I think that's a very interesting question. Over the years I've been here at ClusterSeven, we've seen lots of spreadsheets performing usefully key, important functions within the business, and becoming core parts of a finance process. So without a doubt, there is a place for them. I think to your point, where they become a hindrance is when they're not fully understood, and something we'll explore more as we go through our discussion, I'm sure. But we regularly see that spreadsheets are created for a specific purpose, so an ad hoc report, a way of looking at the business, and that very quickly morphs into into something that becomes the source of another file, or becomes part of a core process. So I think what we find is, without the transparency of how spreadsheets are being utilized within the business, how they're being utilized to support core processes, and if they are having the correct checks and balances in place, that's when they become, they turn from being very useful into becoming a hindrance or potentially a threat to an organization.
Yeah, I love the point about, which we often ignore, is that one spreadsheet becomes the input for another spreadsheet and so on. So you get this sort of cascade through the organization, which brings us quite neatly onto the next point, because our research, which you kindly participated in as ClusterSeven, shows that spreadsheet usage continues to grow, and we identified the causes really as being operational and reporting systems that are totally inflexible to change, and of course IT functions that aren't able to respond to change quickly enough, and so people pave over the gaps with more spreadsheets. Does this resonate with your experience, or do you think there are other more subtle reasons?
So, I mean, it definitely resonates with our experience. I think, the point that was highlighted in the research in terms of the fact that it takes time for IT to respond. IT goes through formal processes, software development lifecycle processes to spec something out, to then develop it, test it before putting it into production. And a lot of the requirements of the business cannot wait for IT to catch up, and again, as you said, there isn't the flexibility within the IT architecture to meet those requirements. So I guess what we start to see people saying is that whilst Excel is a tactical tool that's being used, but some people start talking about it being a strategic tactical tool. So we understand that these requirements will come up. We understand that the IT world will not, organization will not be able to respond in that time. But we need to think of that tactical in a strategic way in order to be able to manage those gaps. And we'll come on to how we can do that later. I think there are, to your question, there are a couple of other points. So what are those subtler reasons? I think there are two things I'd call on. The first being education. We do see that there are, when we start to look at the spreadsheet uses in some organizations, there are duplicate processes being run, but also much more simply that some of the education for some of the employees it hasn't been invested in. So whilst some of those core systems can provide the functionality that the business needs, there is an education gap to be able to realize that they can deliver some of those reports from those core IT systems that have been invested in. So that's the first point. I guess the second point is the classic around budgets. The CFO function is always at the forefront of cost-cutting exercises, and they, the people I talk to certainly feel that they should be leading from the front, so they should be taking their own medicine. And so the IT budgets of the CFO community are pretty much the first that get affected by overall cost cutting. So, and again, as your research shown, without investment, that spreadsheet spiral is going to grow.
Yes, so that brings us neatly on to, what are we going to do about this? I mean, tackling the spreadsheet spiral may be a long-term goal for many organizations, But in the short term, where should businesses start when they're overwhelmed by hundreds, if not thousands, of spreadsheets?
Yeah, I guess again, it's an interesting question, and one that a lot of people, when thinking about it, do I guess are turned off from addressing it, because if in raw terms, if you do look at the spreadsheets that exist within your environment, as you say, there can be hundreds, if not thousands, of spreadsheets that exist within the organization. I think the key to addressing that spiral is really to identify those key files that are starting to run part of your core processes. So what are the files that you're using day in, day out to support a process? There are, without a doubt, redundant files that are not important. There are some very important files which actually to the business are quite important. So if you're in an M&A scenario, you're probably running a spreadsheet around what that transaction looks like. But that's a very in the moment spreadsheet. Once that transaction is made, that spreadsheet actually probably is not something that, well, if it's not going to be used to monitor the ongoing performance of that transaction, it's not something that the organization needs to focus on. So really what you're talking about in addressing those thousands is to try and come up with the inventory and try and understand what are those core spreadsheets the organization relies on to assess their criticality and the materiality to the organization. So, what is the financial risk, or what's the reputational risk or operational risk, for example, of issues with those files? Very quickly, from those thousands of files, in some organizations, you're getting down to just loads of tens or maybe hundreds of files, which become, core to, or that need to be addressed by the organization. I think there are two other points around this. Is once you've started to do that triage process and identify it, that's not a one-off exercise. So what was tactical, 6 months ago, again, maybe it was part of that M&A process. Now that M&A spreadsheet is now being used to monitor the performance of that transaction, ensure that we're on track. That then becomes part of the core reporting fabric, and actually should be something that should be brought into and under control to ensure that we can start breaking that cycle, that spiral. I guess on the screen at the moment, there's that there is sort of an additional complexity that people need to sort of subtler one, which is something that you mentioned earlier, Gary. It's through some people's eyes. I have a final mile report that I use to report to board, and that's through my triage process is quite important. And I believe that it's fed from my 4 main divisions. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that actually the picture can be very different. So in addressing the spiral, the important thing to begin with is to identify those, in this case, that final mile report, but then very quickly to understand the complexities and the operational risk associated with that.
Yeah, it's your diagram on the right, or picture on the right, is pretty scary. I mean, just quickly, Henry. I mean, who would do that? Who's the person that would identify, those critical in the moment or not in the moment spreadsheets?
So I think there's a combination of technology, and we'll come onto that later, I'm sure. But there's a combination of in pulling that imagery together of there's some self-identification. I mean, technology can help you with that identification, but that final mile report, to most people, most finance individuals, are fully aware of the core processes they're running and those that are run on spreadsheets. So they'll know that final mile report. They'll think, potentially, if they've inherited the process, that final report is only fed by 4 other files, which is depicted on the left-hand side. It's not uncommon for people to then suddenly realize there is a lot more complexity to the data that is feeding up into that final mile report. Some are aware, I'd say the majority are not aware of the complexity. But to your point, that top file should be known by the organization.
Okay, so now I'd like you to tell us a bit about you and the business, because genuinely I was very surprised when I sort of stumbled across you a few years ago. I didn't know organizations like you existed. It's an unusual business, and I suspect many of our listeners are not familiar with what you do, and it's very important. So Henry, here's your chance. Tell us, what do you actually do?
Okay, Gary, thank you. I mean, I guess we've covered a bit of that discovery piece. So, as you said, there's three key capabilities here that technology can offer in this space. The discovery, an understanding of the files. So, as we saw in the previous slide, and to your question, most people understand that those sort of core files they're dependent on, or they run core reporting processes from. They may not understand the lineage of the data, the extent of the data aggregation that occurs in those feeder spreadsheets. So what technology brings, what ClusterSeven brings, is a new lens onto that world. So we can start identifying, in that previous example, how data flows up to that top file. We can also assess those files, look at, from a technical perspective, how risky those files are. And really what you're trying to do using that combination of self-declaration and the technology is really to come up with, from all the spreadsheets in your environment, the tens of thousands, that's getting it down to an inventory of the tens, if not hundreds of files that are important to the organization. So through the technology, you're able to consistently log and capture that inventory, to be able to put a materiality assessment against that, so to understand, as I said earlier, what the financial, reputation, regulatory risk may be from those files. And then from that, to apply the controls. So the third stage, that change control. So through that, you're able to maintain version histories of the file, ensure the right people have access to the file, ensuring that any passwords and stuff that are in place remain. From a functional perspective, any changes occur. So if I change macro code, formulas, links, etc., those are being captured. But also the third leg of that control is the data. There's also looking at operational controls around, if P&Ls move by more than 5%, if market data feeds that are coming in are changing within accepted bounds. So through all of that, there is then an alert mechanism that allows, if things move outside of agreed tolerances, alerts are generated to users so they're aware. And then optionally, there's a review and approval process that can be implemented around that. So, for example, those on the call who are familiar with Sarbanes-Oxley controls, being able to capture that audit trail and the reviews and approvals, I'd say over half of our clients use our technology to substantiate their SOX controls.
Okay, so you've referred in the past to, improving technology, improving power of computing. How has automation transformed spreadsheet governance?
I think that's interesting. I mean, so for organizations that have thought about spreadsheet governance, what they have been able to do with automation is scale. So I was think of an organization I went to see 3-4 months ago that had a very robust manual set of manual processes, but the number of spreadsheets that they were able to monitor to this level of scrutiny and to effectively put a software development lifecycle around it, A, was restrictive in terms of the flexibility for the organization, but B, it was only at head office and on a small number of very critical files. With automation, they could take that skill set and that governance framework, and through automation extend that governance framework to a much wider remit of files. I think for those that have ignored the issue, a lot of the time, I think, Gary, to your point earlier, a lot of people aren't aware this sort of technology exists. Most people will have audit points against the overuse of spreadsheets or over-reliance on spreadsheets in the organization, but it's when the audit comes up, people kind of go, well, it is what it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. We can't afford the manual control, so we do as best we can. I think that is being challenged by a couple of things. I think the more that we see people adopting our technology, the more, through the supply chain, as insurance firms take these things on, the asset management firms need to flow on. So you are seeing that flow of expectation of controls. That's one element. I think the other element is we're seeing with mandatory external audit rotation that the spreadsheet agenda is an easy one to raise, and increasingly we're seeing this that audit rotation, but also people like the PCAOB starting to recognize that automation exists and therefore forcing people to address it, the issue.
Okay, so this all sounds pretty sophisticated to me, and especially on an enterprise level. But is this really something that's within the grasp, financially, operationally, and technically within, mid-size enterprises, or are we only talking about large corporates using this kind of spreadsheet governance technology?
I think if you'd asked me 10 years ago, certainly my answer would be I'd not say relevant, but the adoption really had been by those larger business. That's true. Over the last 3 to 4 years, we are seeing a greater interest in our technology and take of our technology by smaller organizations. I think, whilst we boast some of the biggest organizations in the world as clients, I think our smallest client only has 50 employees. And I think, it's interesting if you look at that dynamic, small organizations probably are more reliant on Excel. They don't have the IT budgets. In fact, there's an organization I saw probably 6 to 8 weeks ago who basically said they had a model that they could run their business on. They had no desire or budget to upscale it, but they wanted to de-risk their process. So they're in the process of implementing our technology. Coupled with that, we this year are bringing to market a software as a service solution to bring this technology to a wider marketplace. So to date, it has been an on-premise installation. But with the adoption or the bringing SaaS to the market, organizations will be able to bring their 5 to 10 spreadsheets that are critical organization to be able to put that governance framework in place.
So we've been talking a lot about governance and risk and regulation as drivers of this, and clearly this does a lot for the governance environment, but is this all about governance, or does it translate into real business benefits?
I think you're right. It does a lot to help with the governance and keep the regulators happy and things like that. I think there are very real additional benefits people get. A very simple process, Gary. If I had a spreadsheet which I update and I give to you, without this sort of technology in place, the first thing you do is probably spend 1 or 2 hours checking what I've done, only to go, brilliant, I've updated it correctly, to then do your work. So we do see huge productivity gains by providing transparency where data and spreadsheets are passed between departments, to be able to ensure that loosely having an SLA around the data that has been transferred between users and departments. So I think that is one benefit that we definitely see. I think by putting this framework in place, you start to see some of those streamlining gains that we talked about earlier. So redundancy, where we both have a reconciliation process we're running, one would do, where actually those spreadsheets or some of those processes should be on the IT systems. They've been identified. But I think the final one, which is increasingly of interest to the IT the IT community, which typically want nothing to do with the spreadsheet world, quite rightly, because how can they control what the end users do, is by having that governance framework in place. For the first time, you actually have an idea of the where the holes are in the IT architecture, in the finance world, and it helped really that having that inventory of files and understanding the usage helps define an IT roadmap. So you actually can start making more informed IT investments within your organization, because you actually understand the full extent of the spreadsheet usage, the risks associated and the risks associated with that.
Right. So one of the things that sort of fascinates me from your, overall viewpoint of a lot of different types of businesses using spreadsheets, do you see any sort of common areas or process across industries where spreadsheet governance has become critical?
So I think, if you draw the Venn diagram across the different industries, the one in the center of the finance community is always the one that comes up with the majority of dependence on spreadsheets, and their process dependent on that. Whether you're selling credit derivatives or widgets, you do always find an element of that finance reporting, final mile reporting being completed on a spreadsheet. I guess beyond that, it really does depend on the organization and their investment in the IT in those different within those businesses. But I think that the goal that organizations should be set, and this may sound very strange having talked about being able to control and manage and put governance around spreadsheets, is that organizations really should be looking at a decommissioning strategy of moving those processes on spreadsheets off spreadsheets and into IT systems, but doing it in a manageable way without removing the flexibility from the users, but at the appropriate time, once you understand the extent of the usage, is to be able to migrate that functionality with the flexibility to IT systems. And again, that goes back to your spreadsheet spiral. If we can do it in a controlled way such that we solve the root cause, then it stops perpetuating the issue. Our bet, and it's been proven out over the last 10 years, is you solve it in one place, but the problem will evolve elsewhere.
So we've had many questions, and I'm sorry we can't get to them all, but Tom asks, during the next 5 years, what impact will artificial intelligence and algorithms have on the use of spreadsheets? That's an easy one, isn't it?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that one. The use of spreadsheets, AI, I was at a conference early in the year, AI, machine learning, I'm not sure anybody really knows the implications of that. I think that there is always going to be a need for humans to be involved in this. And if you look at the spreadsheet processes and why spreadsheets are, again, look at your spiral, why are they needed, is because you need human input that hasn't been thought about. And I think AI is going to have to come on a long way before, I guess the implication will be not for the spreadsheet, it would be for the finance community and as a whole, as to, being able to support those ad hoc reporting processes as the business changes. I think AI will come in where you have stability in processes, then absolutely they'll play a part in streamlining and help to remove some of those spreadsheets. Okay,
well done for taking that one on board. So just finally, we've got 1.5 minutes left, Henry. Share with us, everybody loves a war story, so just tell us your favorite war story about how automated spreadsheet governance has avoided a calamitous outcome.
So I guess, well, on the screen you can see from the Telegraph the number. Famously a year ago, M&S, I think on a investor call, had to restate state some of the numbers during the call, and that was called out to a spreadsheet error. I think interestingly, Gary, there was a YouGov survey a couple of years ago that, just to put this into context, 38 billion pounds worth of private sector investment decisions are made through spreadsheets. So the risk of error is huge. But to answer your question, during 2012, when the stock market was jumping around, when actually the JP Morgan whale incident occurred, one of our clients, I think it was during one of those bank holiday weekends, was taking the wrong feed. The live feed wasn't working. Well, wasn't feeding because there was a bank holiday, so they overwrote the live feed. During that week, they found it. I think within 24 hours. But during that week, the FTSE was bouncing around by about 25%, going up and down by 25%, and they were valuing their portfolios off the back of this spreadsheet. So it was a lucky catch, so to speak.
Fantastic. Well, Henry, it's been a fascinating 30 minutes. I knew very little about this area of endeavour, I have to say, and you've explained it very, very clear. It's a huge problem for every organisation, and I think you've given us some helpful pointers as to where to start and how technology really can start to tame the spreadsheet spiral. So, Henry, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and giving us some of the benefit of a lot of your experience. And we've learned a bit about ClusterSeven as well. Thank you, audience, for coming to this webinar. I hope you got something out of it, you enjoyed it and learned something. I look forward to welcoming you back to another webinar in the future. Thank you.